Hi, this is Beth from Around the Table Yarns. Today is the second session of Sweater Club doing the Order of the Garter sweater by Anna Maria Otvos. And as before, we will not be showing the pattern because it is a paid pattern on Ravelry, but we will be demonstrating how to pick up the stitches on the shoulder today. And then we're going to talk a little bit about buttons and buttonholes as well. So let me get situated with my and dear Lord, I hope I put it back in here. Oh, good, I did. All right. So what we are doing today, at this point, actually, second. All right, actually, I'm backing up a little bit more. So the back of our, so far what we have done is just the back of our sweater. And I'm gonna be demonstrating how to pick up the stitches along the side, but because because I showed that this morning, but I just wanna show, so when you get to the end of the back, you'll have done your increases at the armholes. And we had some questions today about the length of this armhole opening. And so I just want to clarify some things that was shared in this morning's class. The first thing that was shared in this morning's class is that one of our participants, Cindy, found a Ravelry thread with a conversation with the designer who stated that it was not a mistake to get row gauge of 28 rows to 4 inches, that she had aggressively blocked her garter stitch so that she got 28 rows. So she had essentially wetted her swatch and then blocked it out, stretching it so that 28 rows equaled 4 inches. So we discussed that in the group this morning, and the consensus was that none of us felt particularly called to aggressively block our sweater, that is not what we're going to do. So we are adding, we're working with her gauge, but we're adding rows to lengthen in some significant places. And what that means is that you will be using more yarn potentially than the pattern calls for. So I just want to clarify that up front, that you hopefully you bought sufficient and maybe a little extra yarn for your project. If you didn't, now would be a good time to try and get the same dye lot. Or, if it means that you're adding a couple of inches extra at the bottom to get the length that you want, maybe you'll have a subtle or bold color block at the bottom of your sweater. But I do want to just underline that I think that we might be using up more yarn because we are not going to aggressively block these to get the 28 rows per 4 inches. So what does that mean? There are a couple of places in the pattern where I think we have to lengthen, and one of them is this opening of the armhole. So this is my back, and it's got some short row shaping here along the top that just gives it a gentle sort of shoulder shaping. And this is where I was supposed to stop and begin my armhole shaping. So in other words, this was supposed to be aggressively blocked open to the length that this whole thing is. And I don't really like that kind of effect on my fabric. And so I went ahead and elected to do 10 more ridges or 20 more rows total. And so I got the extra length that I needed by just adding 2 more inches total of rows. I recorded how many rows I did extra, and then I went ahead and did my armhole shaping. So once you've gotten to the bottom of your armholes, and that's what we covered the first time, you will be breaking your yarn. So my yarn is broken, and you'll be transferring your stitches to a holder for the time being. My favorite holder right now are barber cords, which are silicone 2mm hollow tubes, and they allow you to just attach the tube to the tip of your knitting needle and slide the stitches over. You can purchase them through the store. You can purchase them on Amazon. There are all kinds of different places. If you don't have them, a tapestry needle threaded with smooth cotton yarn will do the trick and will be just fine. What I like about the barber cord is that it's very easy to get the stitches on. I just did that in those few seconds. But then also, when I'm ready to put the stitches back onto a needle, you reattach the tube and you gently move the stitches back onto the needle like that. So I just like how smooth and efficient it makes transferring stitches. And I like that it's flexible and it doesn't catch on my knitting. When I tie it, I tend to tie it in an overhand knot because I think those are less likely to come out than a square knot. And those are my stitches held nice and smooth, and it will be easy for me to put them back on the needle. Okay. We spent some time today talking about the construction of this sweater, and I can draw a little picture of that for you. This sweater is done in pieces. So right now we're looking at the top of my back, and in the pattern, oh, phew. Thought I left my pattern behind. Okay, on page 3. So I am on page 3 of the pattern, and I just want to refer back. I'm looking on page 3 of the pattern after the short row shaping is done and you've worked several more rows. She has you place a blue and a red marker. And when you're doing these rows, your project is on the needles. So the cast on edge is at the bottom. The right side of the material is facing you, and you place the red marker on the right-hand side, the first stitch of the row, and the blue marker on the last stitch of the row. Okay, so if this is the right side of the fabric with the red marker in place, if I'm going to pick up for the shoulder, I have to flip it around. Okay, so my cast on edge goes back up to the top, to the shoulder, and now my blue marker is on the right-hand side. So I want everybody to be clear where their markers are as we start to pick this up. We are going to be picking up, so this is the back of my neckline and my right shoulder here and my left shoulder here. So just exactly like you think they should be. So as I was starting to draw, this is the line. Oh, there. So this is the line at the top of my sweater. And we're going to be picking up stitches here on this side. So this is the blue marker. And this is the red marker. And I'm going to pick up, and we have a green marker here and here. And we're going to pick up stitches. One stitch is going to be picked up for every stitch up to and including where the green marker is. And then we're going to pick up one stitch alongside of that green marker. So we'll have one extra stitch. When you look at a stitch, usually we're looking at a stitch and it looks like a horseshoe. And so when you pick up a stitch, you want to go into the center of the horseshoe to pick it up. But because the cast on is turned upside down, essentially, we're actually looking at a horseshoe that's a lucky horseshoe. So you're looking for a horseshoe like this. This is the cast on stitch at the top of it. And we're going to be looking for this U-shaped stitch to go into the center of. These stitches will be alongside of each other. And so here's another one, and here's the center of it. So when we go into the center of a stitch and pull a new stitch out, then we're going to take our needle and go into the center of the next stitch. And there's two legs between the openings that we're going in. In other words, we go in, this is the very edge, there's one leg. I drew this so it doesn't look like there's any kind of a leg. So there's a line in the middle. There we go. Now there's two legs. So we go into this one and draw out a loop. That's the first stitch we'll pick up. And then we're going to go into this one. So there's one leg that's the outside of the first stitch, and the next leg is the inside leg of the next stitch. I'm going to demonstrate that, but I just want you to have this image of these horseshoe shaped stitches, and that's what we're looking to go into. So let's get close up. Let's turn on. Let's turn on. Sorry, I have to adjust all the lighting. All right, there we go. Too bright, not too bright. All right. So here's my first row, and you can sort of see at the edge, if I pull this apart, that I have a loop of yarn. So this is the loop of yarn, and this is one leg on the outside and one leg on the inside. And what I'm going to do with my knitting needle is go in. I have to find my knitting needle. There it is. Okay. So I'm going to insert, to pick up a stitch, I'm going to insert my knitting needle from the front, the face of the fabric, to the back of the fabric. And with not the tail, with the working yarn, I'll make a tail, make a loop like that. So I have the working yarn and a little tail. There's my tail, there's my working yarn. And I'm going to just, it's going to lose my needles. So I'm going to put that in, pinch my needle so it doesn't run away again. I'm going to loop a loop of yarn over it, and I'm going to hold it pretty taut. To make it come through, I also pull with my left thumb and finger. So I open up that stitch so that U that I was going into, I'm pulling a stitch out of. And then remember I said you want to go over two legs. So if I just went one leg over, if I just went into the next space here, that would only be a half a stitch over. And I want these to be spaced a stitch width apart. So if you can kind of see here, this is the next horseshoe. It's upside down and it's right there. So I want to go one leg over, another leg over, and into the center. Take my working yarn, not my tail, not my other tail. So take my working yarn, wrap it around normally. I hold it pretty firmly with my right hand or your left hand, but then I use my other hand to bring that stitch out. And you can see that stitch is, it looks like it's just a continuation of the row that's below it. So I'm going to keep doing that. So here's one leg, two legs, and I go in next to the second leg from front to back. So if I was looking at it from directly above, you can see that my needle is perpendicular through, it's going straight through from the front side to the back side. I wrap around normally and then pull that through. And I'm going to keep going all the way down until I pick up 20 stitches, which is where I did take out my green needle, my green marker earlier. I forgot to put it back in. but you're going to pick up to the stitch that the marker is inside of. 5, 6. And one thing you can notice is that if you look at the top edge, it looks like I've got one stitch coming out of each one of the cast on stitches. So they're evenly spaced across. And you want to keep doing that all the way across to the 20th stitch or the 17th stitch or whichever stitch you're supposed to be doing for your size. And I do not hesitate to use my left hand to pull away to make it easier for me to see that stitch. So I'm looking for this U shape. You can see that it's above the purl bump of the stitch below. So I'm above this purl bump here, and I want to look above that purl bump. So that's another way to aim for it, is to aim for the purl bump. And you want to go just over the purl bump. That was too close. That one is in the wrong place. So see that I went in here. Do you see how this stitch is coming out of the center of a stitch? And this one is coming out of the center of the stitch, but this one is distorted and it's coming between the two stitches. So it's not coming out of the center of a stitch. And the way that I can tell that, especially, is if I pull the material away from my knitting needle. If I'm doing it right, there should be 2 legs in between each of my stitches. And there's only 1 leg in between this stitch and this stitch. There's just 1 leg there, but there's 2 legs here and here and here. So that one is too close. So I just back it off, take it out, and move my needle so that it goes 1, 2 over the second leg and goes in. So you're just going to keep doing that across until you get to the first green marker. And this is where my green marker was. So I have the correct number now. And then in the pattern, it tells you that you're going to pick up 1 more for the edge. And this time we're intentionally going to go between. So here's the outside edge of the stitch that I'm coming out of. You can see the loop around it there. And so I'm going to go in between this stitch and this stitch on purpose. And that's the 1 extra stitch. And that's how you pick up your stitches to get started with your right front piece. So now they're attached. And when I work back, I will be continuing in garter stitch down the right front of the sweater. So it's the same technique for that as the left front. You take out the green marker at this point as you start working it. In my notes section that I shared with everybody, there was the 4th page, sorry. So the 3rd page has where we're picking up for the right front +1. And then it's got a little graphic for how we're going to work the short rows. So having picked up these stitches, you're going to start at the bottom of this graphic and you'll pick up all the stitches +1. And then the first short row, you go back so far, and then you come back to the edge. and then you'll go past where you stopped the last time and go so much further. That's the third one. And then you go back to the edge, and then after that, you'll just complete the rows. So there's only 2 partial rows, and then the rest of them are full rows. And then after that, you'll be placing that, I believe it's the blue marker at the edge of the work. The last page of the notes that I've shared with people, and if you don't have them, please send me something in the chat and let me know so that I can send it to you. But the last page is a writing out of how the neck shaping goes. When we were talking about it in class today, we were demonstrating that we've picked up these stitches here. We've done a little bit of short row shaping, and then we're going to be going almost immediately into the neck shaping. And the neck shaping will end, and then it will go straight.
There's a little bit of glare on the paper.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you.
That's okay.
There. Okay. So we've got the shoulders, and we've picked up, and we're going to go down and then curve to do the front neck shaping. And while we're doing that, this side stays straight, and it's not until after this curve that it starts to get longer. So this is the same part that we've lengthened in the back. And so I added 20 rows in this area. And what we talked about in class today is that you may want to add, once you've finished your short rows here, you may want to add some rows to lengthen this straight part of the neck. But if you do, they have to come out of whatever rows you added to the underarm of to the armhole of your sweater. Okay, so for example, if I added 20 total and I wanted to add 6 rows up here to just make the neckline dip down a little bit more, in other words, that it would be a little bit deeper around my neck, so it's more comfortable around my neck, then I want to take those 6 rows out of the 20 because they're still being lengthened along here. So if you and I do recommend that you lengthen this part a little bit so that it's more comfortable fitting around your neckline. And the best way to check for that is for you to try it on. So get to the end of your short row shaping and then put this over your shoulder, over your right shoulder, and get an idea if you only had 2 more inches of the increases to make the neckline, would that run into the front of your neck? And I think for most of us, it would. So we want to drop it another inch or so, depends on your, like how deep you want your neckline. But whatever amount you drop it, you're going to subtract that from additional lengthening that you might be doing in the armhole after the neckline shaping. The goal for next time is to get to the same place in the fronts as we are on the backs, on the back. So what I'd like is for us to pick up the right front and get it to the finished part of the armhole shaping, and pick up the left front and get it to the same place. On the right front, the pattern has buttonholes. Let's see if we can get this to be not glary. Let me turn off the overhead because that's what's glaring. There we go. That's better. All right. So in my notes that I shared with people, when you've placed your markers and you're going to start your neck edge, so there could be rows added before the neck shaping starts. And I wouldn't do all of the rows before the neck shaping starts because that would drop your neckline down too far. But I would add maybe an inch or an inch and a half before the neck shaping starts. So that might be a portion of the rows you added total to your back armhole. So then you do your shaping of the neck, and that's going to be along the neck edge. So I'm looking at this as though I were looking at the right side of the fabric. The right hand edge will stay straight and the left hand edge will be increasing. So when you are on a right side row, you will knit until you have 2 stitches left. And before those 2 stitches, you make one right. And that adds 1 stitch at the neck edge. And then you'll knit back, you'll knit over, you'll knit back, you'll knit, and on the 4th row, you're going to do the increase again. At the end of that, you're going to place the red marker on the first shoulder stitch. And it should be the opposite side as the other red marker. So that makes sense because you've got the blue marker is the one that's on this shoulder right now. So right here is the blue marker. And then you're going to continue with your increases. But when you get to row 20, if you're doing some of the smaller sizes, you'll go to row 29. When you get to row 22, if you're doing small 2, you'll go to row 29. If you get to row 24 and you're doing M1 or M2 or L2, when you finish this row, you go to row 29, 26. If you're doing L1, when you finish this row, you go to 29 and so on. At 29, you start to increase on the neck edge. So this is a wrong side row. Knit 2, make 1 right, knit to the end. This is still an increase on the neck edge. So row 29 is a wrong side row and you are still increasing on the neck edge. So it's still on this curve coming out. And again, you want to follow for your sizes. So once you do the row and then it says at this point go to this, it's after you finish that row that you then skip to the next place. Row 38 has a cable cast on at the end of the row. So this is a right side row. So you're starting at the shoulder edge and you're working to the end of all of your shaping, and then you'll be adding stitches. And this will be the placket stitches or the very front stitches of the sweater. And so different sizes will have different numbers of stitches cast on. And then after that, you will be knitting all your stitches. On the 44th row is where they're placing the buttonhole. So with the difference in our row gauge to the pattern and the issues that people are having with this, I would like to suggest that you omit the buttonhole and you consider having a buttonhole in the trim or adding some kind of a frog or creating a buttonhole after the fact. And the way that you can create a buttonhole after the fact is simply to decide where you want it, put a knitting needle into the fabric where you want it in between stitches, and then swish it around and make a bigger hole. It's sort of like the way people get those big holes in their ears. They just force it open between the stitches, and you can stitch that down, and a small button can go through a buttonhole like that. That's actually how many Japanese designers place buttonholes in their knitted work. It's not my favorite way of doing a buttonhole, but it is an easy after the fact way of doing a buttonhole. Another thing that you could consider is doing snaps on the inside of the sweater and having a button on the outside. But if you really want to have a buttonhole, then you need to look at where the buttonholes are going to be So if we're looking at the front of the sweater and it's the right front, so the buttonholes are on this. So I'm now facing the sweater the other way. There's the back. Here's the front. That's not dark enough. There we go. So there's my sweater front, and it's the right front that gets the buttonholes. So you want to be between a half an inch or so of the top of the placket where the buttons go, and they want to do it in the last 6 stitches. So think about where you're placing them, and you want to make sure that you're about a half an inch from the point where you have done the cable cast on, so that your top button is roughly in the correct place at the top of your sweater. So that may or may not be row 44, but this is the instruction for the buttonhole row. You are on a right side row, so you're knitting over towards from the shoulder towards the neck. And when you get to the last 6 stitches, so 6 stitches remain on your needle, you'll knit 2 together and then yarn over twice. So in other words, you wrap the yarn twice. For yarn over, you just go around 2 times, and then you do an SSK on the other side, and then you knit 2. And then when you get to those stitches on the next row, so you'll knit 3, and then you'll knit 1, purl 1 into that double yarn over. And then you'll knit to the end. So what does that look like? Let's just do one. So I'm gonna work till I have 6 stitches left. Obviously, this is not where we would put a buttonhole, but I just want to demonstrate the buttonhole technique that is in the pattern. One, two, three, four, five, six. Okay, so knit 2 together. So that stretches the stitches over to the right and decreases 1 space. And then I'm going to bring my yarn forward around the needle and forward again around the needle. So I wrap the needle 2 times, yarn over, and then I do an SSK. So I do my SSKs that funny way. And then you knit to the last 2, you knit the last 2 stitches. You're going to turn and go back. So in the next row, you resolve that decrease and increase that we just made. So here's my normal knit 2, and there's my SSK, and here's my yarn over. So it just looks like 2 wraps around the needle, and just very carefully you knit into that and let it come off 1 wrap, and there's still 1 wrap on the needle. Bring the yarn forward to purl into the 2nd wrap, and then resume knitting. So there's only 1 purl, you resume knitting across the rest of the stitches. So that's how she's having you do a buttonhole. It's pretty straightforward. It's a 2-roll buttonhole, and it makes a nice big opening. So if you want a bigger button, you can make a nice big opening that way. If you don't want the buttonhole open that far, you could do just 1 yarn over and still knit 1 and purl 1 into that strand. And that will make a slightly smaller buttonhole. You can also make the buttonhole this size, and then if you don't like the size of it, if it seems too big later, you could take thread and stitch it shut, or take yarn and stitch it a little bit more shut after the fact. But this will make a sufficiently large buttonhole to be usable for the sweater. and it goes over 2 rows. And then you would work to the end of the piece. Okay. So those are the 2 things I wanted to demonstrate. Oop. I'm here in the dark now. It's it was a big conversation this morning that we are having to do so much knitting math for this pattern. I do think it's very doable. I think that just by lengthening it a little bit, you're going to have a sweater that fits really well. I do encourage you to contact me if you have any problems. And I'm happy to talk through. I've had people emailing me and calling about it. So if you do have any questions or problems, please feel free to call the store 216-230-9224 or send an email to info@aroundthetableyarns.com and I'm happy to answer. If you would like a copy of my pattern notes so far, I'm happy to email those to you. Just send me an email with your contact information and I will get it right back to you. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Any questions?
I'm still on mute. I have a question.
Sure.
So adding the shaping to the armhole side, would I do it under the shaping the armhole instructions?
Adding rows to the armhole
And
side.
as I'm rows, yeah, adding the rows to it.
So
Do it under.
if you add rows to you've done your armholes.
Yeah, I added like altogether I have 44 rows.
And
The front side, instead of 32, I have 44.
Okay, so you added 12.
12, yes.
So you could add some here.
Right.
Because the
Make
distance
this
from the back of your neck to the front of your neck is not 1 inch.
Right.
No, it's probably 4 inches from front to back. And so you don't want the front of the sweater to try and come up here because then it will be cutting into your neck while you're wearing it. So you want this length before you start to curve it to come forward enough. And you could lay it on your shoulder and see that it is coming forward enough before you start adding the front curve.
Okay.
So I really think this is a good example of a time when you can try it on yourself, but keep track. If you added 12 rows to your back, then that's how many extra you can add.
Right. Someplace,
so that it lengthens this line.
Okay.
The same number.
Okay. All right.
So you could put them all up here if you want the neckline to come down.
Okay.
And be a lower neckline. And you might like that. That may be a good alternative if you like a little bit more of a U neckline instead of a round neckline. You might want to drop it down further. But you could also split the difference. So if you had 12, you could put 6 here and 6 here, 6 lower down.
Okay. Okay.
But the same idea is that you want to do any increases after the short rows before any shaping. So before the neck shaping, and then once the neck shaping is done, before the armhole shaping.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. That was my question. It's like, so it's before I start the armhole shaping part, if I put them on that side.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. And then I'll come and see you.
And then you'll come and see me. Okay. And if you can't come and see me, please feel free to contact us. We're happy to take these questions.
Okay.
All right. Have a great night.
Thank you.
And so your homework is to get to the bottom of the armhole shaping for the backs and the fronts. We'll see ya. And we'll see you out. I can't remember what the date was. It'll be September I always mean to look before I before I open my big mouth. So Sweater Club in September is September 23rd. So we'll be joining the bodies, the front and the backs together, and then I think that week we'll talk about adding an afterthought pocket maybe. So have a good month. Bye bye.